Right now, while the entire country is obsessed with election polls, viral internet drama, and domestic scandals, an invisible line is being drawn in the sky above the United States. Most people think the vast oceans protect America. They don't. Not anymore. The terrifying reality that Pentagon war planners whisper about behind closed doors is that the American homeland is completely, undeniably naked. If a next-generation weapon was launched at Washington, New York, or Los Angeles tomorrow, there is absolutely nothing our military could do to stop it. Nothing. The weapons move too fast, maneuver too unpredictably, and strike before the warning sirens even finish their first rotation. But a radical trillion-dollar plan is quietly moving from science fiction into actual political doctrine. You have probably heard it mocked on late-night television. They call it the American Iron Dome, or, more dramatically, the Golden Dome. But while the media laughs and dismisses it as campaign rhetoric, the biggest defense contractors on Earth are quietly salivating. Because we are not talking about a few radar stations and rocket batteries. We are talking about $1.2 trillion. We are talking about the militarization of the stratosphere. We are talking about space lasers. And the scariest part? The true purpose of this mega project might not be defensive at all. To understand what is actually happening, we have to rewind for a second and look at a political chess game that nobody is talking about. Imagine you are sitting inside the Situation Room. The glowing screens on the wall are tracking Chinese DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles and Russian avant-garde missiles. These aren't your grandfather's nukes. Traditional intercontinental ballistic missiles fly in a predictable arc. They go high up into space, and they come down. We have early warning systems for that. We have ground-based interceptors in Alaska for that. But hypersonics? They play by completely different rules. A hypersonic glide vehicle doesn't fly. It skips. Imagine skipping a stone across a pond. That is what this weapon does to the Earth's atmosphere. It travels at 5, 10, sometimes 15 times the speed of sound, surfing on the edge of space, zigzagging unpredictably. It completely blinds our traditional radars because it flies below the ballistic missile warning systems but above the standard air defense systems. It is a ghost. Russia has them. China has them. And the United States is desperately behind. This is the exact fear that birthed the concept of the Golden Dome. When Donald Trump stood on a stage and promised a giant, impenetrable dome over the entire country, critics immediately dismissed it as hyperbole. An Iron Dome over Israel makes sense. It is a tiny country fighting crude, unguided rockets fired from just a few miles away. The United States is almost 4 million square miles. You cannot build a physical dome. You cannot scatter enough Patriot missile batteries across the Midwest, the Rockies, and the eastern seaboard to protect every farm and city. The physics simply do not work. It is like trying to stop a bullet with a tennis racket. But that is exactly where the strategy completely changes. And this is where things get dangerous. Because the people whispering in the ears of politicians know that you can't use kinetic interceptors, shooting a bullet with a bullet to cover a continent. The failure rate is too high. You need something that travels faster than a hypersonic missile. You need something that travels at the speed of light. Enter directed energy weapons, space lasers. For decades, the idea of weaponizing space was considered a massive geopolitical taboo, a red line that no superpower wanted to cross. But that line is already blurring, and we are accelerating toward it at breakneck speed. The Pentagon has been quietly pouring billions of dollars into directed energy research. We aren't talking about Hollywood blasters making pew-pew sounds. We are talking about megawatt-class chemical and solid-state lasers capable of superheating the titanium skin of an incoming missile until it violently disintegrates in the upper atmosphere. To create a true shield over America, you wouldn't build it on the ground. The Earth's curvature and weather systems get in the way. You would build it in low Earth orbit, a constellation of armed satellites, constantly tracking, constantly aiming, the ultimate high ground. But what happened next shocked even veteran American intelligence officials. Because when you propose a project this massive, you don't just change the military landscape, you change the global economy. $1.2 trillion. Let that number sink in. That is not just a defense budget. That is a generational wealth transfer. That is the gross domestic product of entire nations. When politicians talk about the Golden Dome, they are not just talking to the voters. They are signaling Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. They are ringing the dinner bell. But here is the secret nobody in Washington wants to admit out loud. Building this dome isn't actually about stopping missiles. We'll come back to that in a minute. First, you have to understand the trap. The history of the Cold War is repeating itself, but this time, the stakes are astronomically higher. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative. The media quickly dubbed it Star Wars. It was a wildly ambitious, technologically impossible plan to use space-based X-ray lasers to shoot down Soviet nukes. Scientists said it was impossible. Politicians called it reckless. But Reagan pushed it anyway. And here is the brilliant, ruthless reality of Star Wars. It didn't matter if it actually worked. What mattered is that the Soviet Union believed it might work. Moscow looked at the American economy, looked at their own failing, stagnant system, and realized they would have to spend themselves into absolute oblivion just to compete. Star Wars was a psychological weapon. It was economic warfare disguised as missile defense. It broke the back of the Soviet economy. Now pay attention to what happens next, because this is where the entire strategy starts collapsing into something much darker. Fast forward to today. The adversary isn't a crumbling Soviet empire. It is China, a superpower with a massive industrial base, a booming tech sector, and a terrifyingly efficient military buildup. Beijing is watching the debate over the American Golden Dome very, very closely. They know the United States is politically divided. They know our national debt is spiraling out of control. So, if Washington suddenly commits $1.2 trillion to putting lasers in space, how does Beijing respond? They have two choices. They can try to build their own dome, triggering the most expensive arms race in human history. Or they can build more missiles, cheaper, faster, stealthier missiles to overwhelm the American shield. Because a shield doesn't just protect you, it provokes your enemy. Think about it. If two men are standing in a room with guns pointed at each other, there is a tense, terrifying balance. That is mutually assured destruction. That is the exact mechanism that has stopped the world from ending in nuclear fire since 1945. If I shoot you, you shoot me. We both die. Therefore, nobody pulls the trigger. But what happens if one man suddenly puts on a bulletproof vest? The balance is instantly broken. The man with the vest suddenly has the freedom to attack without fear of retaliation. The man without the vest suddenly feels an overwhelming existential pressure to shoot first before the vest is fully strapped on. By building the Golden Dome, the United States is putting on the vest, and countries like Russia and China view that not as a defensive measure, but as the ultimate preparation for an American first strike. If you want to understand the real power games shaping the world without the boring mainstream news filters, make sure to subscribe. Now, let's go deeper into the dark side of this technology. Because the real reason the Golden Dome is terrifying isn't what it does to missiles, it's what it does to everything else. Here is the political chess game nobody is talking about. A laser in space that is powerful enough to melt a hypersonic glide vehicle traveling at Mach 15 is a weapon of unfathomable power. And that weapon doesn't just have to point down at missiles. It can point sideways. If you can blind a missile, you can blind a satellite. In modern warfare, satellites are the eyes, ears, and nervous system of a nation. They control GPS navigation. They guide smart bombs. They intercept secure communications. They even manage the timing signals for the global banking system. If a war breaks out over Taiwan, or in Eastern Europe, or the South China Sea, the first shots won't be fired on the ground. They will be fired in orbit. The side that controls space controls the battlefield. Period. The Golden Dome, with its massive constellation of directed energy platforms, would give the United States the ability to instantly blind the Chinese or Russian military. In a fraction of a second, at the speed of light, an entire nation's early warning systems could go completely dark. No radar, no communications, just total terrifying silence. And this is the hidden motive behind the trillion-dollar price tag. The politicians sell it to the public as a shield to protect American cities from destruction. They sell the comforting image of a glowing, invisible dome keeping families safe while they sleep. It plays brilliantly on the campaign trail. It makes voters feel secure, but inside the Pentagon, they know the truth. The Golden Dome is the ultimate offensive weapon. It is the absolute militarization of the heavens. It is the ability to hold the entire globe hostage from low Earth orbit. But there is a fatal flaw in this grand strategy. A vulnerability so obvious that it almost feels like a bad joke. Space is fragile. Satellites, no matter how heavily armed, move in highly predictable orbits. They are sitting ducks. If the United States begins launching hundreds of laser-equipped platforms into space, China won't just sit back and watch us build the Death Star. They don't need a trillion-dollar laser to defeat a trillion-dollar laser. They just need a bucket of bolts. Seriously. At orbital velocities, a handful of cheap ball bearings traveling at 17,000 miles per hour will shred a billion-dollar weapons platform like a shotgun, blasting a tin can. China has already successfully tested anti-satellite missiles. They have already deployed satellites with robotic arms designed to grapple and destroy other satellites. The moment the first components of the Golden Dome go into orbit, space becomes a heavily armed minefield. We are taking the pristine vacuum above our heads and transforming it into the most dangerous flashpoint in human history. And if you think the collateral damage of a space war is just a few broken satellites, think again. Have you ever heard of the Kessler syndrome? It is a scenario where a single explosion in space creates a cloud of debris. That debris hits other satellites, creating more debris, causing a chain reaction that destroys everything in low Earth orbit. Every GPS satellite, every weather monitor, every communication relay gone. The modern world would be thrown back into the 1970s in a matter of hours. Supply chains would collapse. Global shipping would freeze. Airplanes would be grounded. The economic devastation would make the Great Depression look like a minor inconvenience, and we are risking all of that to build a shield that might not even work. And here is where the political hypocrisy really starts to shine. The same leaders demanding this trillion-dollar space shield are actively cutting funding for the fundamental infrastructure that actually keeps the country running. We are preparing to fight a high-tech space war of the future, while our domestic power grids are vulnerable to a decent winter storm or a basic cyber attack. What good is a billion-dollar space laser if hackers from a basement in St. Petersburg or a military unit in Beijing can shut down the water supply to the eastern seaboard? What good is an impenetrable dome if the enemy is already inside the house, manipulating social media algorithms, buying up critical agricultural supply chains, and funding proxy wars that bleed us dry? It is the ultimate illusion of security. We are building a titanium roof on a house with no walls, but the momentum might be unstoppable at this point. The defense contractors have tasted blood. The geopolitical tension with China is too high to ignore. The fear of hypersonics is too real. The lobbying dollars are already flowing into Washington, D.C. at record speed. Think tanks are publishing white papers. Feasibility studies will be commissioned. Prototypes will be built in highly classified secret facilities in the Nevada desert. The $1.2 trillion will be quietly hidden inside massive omnibus spending bills, categorized under innocuous-sounding acronyms that nobody bothers to read. And the public? The public will be completely distracted by the next election cycle, the next celebrity scandal, the next viral outrage. We will argue about what a politician tweeted while the military-industrial complex quietly redraws the map of global power. But up there, in the cold, silent dark of orbit, the architecture of the next world war is being assembled piece by piece. We are crossing a threshold that we can never step back from. The moment a weaponized laser is permanently stationed over our heads, the rules of global survival change forever. The delicate, terrifying balance of power that has kept the world from destroying itself for 80 years will be shattered. And if that happens, the world may be entering a completely different era. Because the next global conflict may not begin with troops crossing a border, or bombers flying over a city, or even a missile launching from a silo. It will begin in total silence, hundreds of miles above the earth, in the blink of an eye, plunging a nation into darkness before anyone even realizes the war has started. And the frightening part is, this may already be happening.